Okay, so now we're moving on to recording drums. We've got our click track down, which essentially everybody in the band can record to, but it's really important essentially for cutting the track, which is what the drums are. So my friend Randy has agreed to come in and play some drums for us. How you doing, Randy?
How are you?
Good, all good. So we got a kit set up, and you know, you hear a lot of legendary tales of Led Zeppelin recording in castles and all these kind of things, which is great if you've got a castle in your backyard, but most of us don't. So here we are. Actually, in a pretty tight room. We've got soundproofing on the ceiling. We've got nice, you know, really sound-absorbing material on the walls. We've even got carpet here on the floor, so it's not a very live room at all. Yet, a lot of, in the mix down, you can really develop a lot of tones and really get things, you know, to sound completely different than the actual room you recorded in. Now, Randy, drums are an intricate instrument because it's many instruments. You're trying to record not only each individual drum, but the group sound of the whole thing together. So let's talk a little bit about tuning, about microphones, and just the setup to record a drum kit.
Well, for today we're doing a basic mic setup. We're doing a standard Shure SM57 on the snare, an AKG D112E in the kick drum, Audix Micro D on the snare, which is very similar to an SM98 micro type mic. We've got an Audio-Technica AE3000 on the floor tom here, and behind me we're using an inexpensive C1 Studio Project C1 condenser, large diaphragm, fairly inexpensive. You know, $200 compared to buying a Telefunken or a Neumann for thousands.
Right. And again, we're keeping in mind we're trying to record here on a budget, maybe even a project studio, making demos, songwriting, things like that. So.
Correct.
And what do you have in the kick drum then?
Well, the kick drum we're using an AKG D112E. It's a modified D112, and it's on the May system. It's a suspension system inside the drum. And then for muffling, I just have a hotel towel, kind of rolled up, touching both the front and the batter head. And that's it. That's all that's in there.
Now, how about as far as the tuning? Because that's a big thing as far as the top head, bottom head. I notice you've got all your microphones on the top, essentially, except for the kick drum is inside, but your top miking, everything.
Because that's where the attack is. When you record a drum, essentially, outside of the kick drum, your attack is where the stick lies. You can mic from the inside of the tom, but then you have to add, using EQs and so forth, attack.
And then as far as, let's talk about the actual tuning now, the you know, going around the drum with the lugs. How do you tune? I've certainly played with a lot of drummers, some very good drummers who didn't know how to tune their drums very well, and rather, you know, one of the things I like to do here on Rock Shop is rather than having to rely on all the outside people, this is all about how do we learn how to do some of these things ourselves, you know?
Tuning's a big portion of playing with a band. You know, having fairly decent equipment and it being in tune, having your toms and your snare in tune, and basically you start with the top and bottom head, even tensioned, same pitch. Your top head is always going to be for tone and feel. And you want to go around each lug, each tension rod, and make sure that it's in tune with itself. Taking the stick and tapping at each tension rod. Same thing with the toms, but with the toms, taking your finger, your index finger, pressing ever so lightly in the center of the head. And I'll show you without, there's a lot of overtones, but taking your index, pressing lightly in the middle of the head, now you get the more defined pitch of the tension rod. And going around and making sure they're all in pitch with each other, and doing that with all your toms, and that gives you a starting point of tone.
Now you have pretty small toms, and let's, you know, especially with modern music, a lot of pop music, rock and roll and stuff is all recorded in standard A440, which is kind of what the guitars were designed to play in, pianos and everything. But, you know, a lot of modern rock, a lot of modern metal especially, is all in really dark, low tunings. Now, how do you set drums? How do you decide what the size of the drum, the tuning of the drum is when you're playing in that kind of a setting?
Well, larger drums don't transcend into the mics very well. So when you're doing these fast fills, it's mud. And
Okay.
of course, live, going through a huge PA,
Sure.
there's no sound there. So a lot of guys are now switching down to smaller toms that are pitched. This particular kit was custom built, and we start with the 8, which is an E flat, going to an A on the 10, going to a D on the 12, and so forth, an A on the 14,
Okay.
and we finally end up to an E. So we start at E flat, and we end up on E on the 16.
So sometimes what you see is not what you get. And even your kick drum is what, 22-inch?
That's a 22 by 16.
Okay, so it's a pretty small diameter, even though
Correct.
you can, on the recordings and certainly in the mix, you can manipulate that to really get that to sound good. So what you're saying is it's better to use a smaller drum with good pitch, good tone, good response, and to be able to record that, get that sort of to tape, as we would say.
Correctly, because
Right.
then we can go back using EQ, but we can also use programs like BFD, Drumagog, and Tune Track,
Okay.
and actually resample the sound. So let's say we want a fatter sound or a darker sound, like a Disturbed, Slipknot type of thing. We can go back and using these programs.
How about if you want like a 9-inch Nails or a Ministry, like a real, like almost program sound? You can use those type of programs
Absolutely,
to do that as well?
You can do that in Drumagog and Tune Track. You can actually send these samples back out and clean up all the little nuances
Uh-huh.
and just have drum sounds. But you know what? You can do that by hand too. You don't actually have to use programs like Drumagog and whatnot can be very, very expensive.
Right. How much is that, by the way? Because I don't know either.
They're anywhere between 500 and 1,000, depending
It's a
on
lot
the
of money
sample
for a
package.
program. Yeah,
Absolutely.
sure. Right.
I mean, even plugins, just effects plugins are starting. Just for maybe 2 effects, they're starting at like $500, and to get a
Right.
huge bundle can be upwards to $3,000-4,000.
Right.
Not everybody has that. So if you don't have Drumagog and you have a few minutes to kill, so you're doing a project studio, just to kill the ghost notes, and in between fills on the drums, a lot of guys will cut in between the fills. So let's say we're working on the toms.
Right.
They'll cut up to the fill and after the fill. They cut all that.
You're saying
away.
in the digital domain on
the
on Pro Tools or on a digital.
If we're in a DAW system like Vegas or Sonar, Pro Tools, Cubase, and you're looking at a tom track, here's your fill, but you got all this empty space here
Right.
on both sides. You cut that down, it just trims.
So you're basically
down to the
essentially
fill.
muting or cutting that out, so it's not
Correct.
in there. Right.
So now you've deadened up the track. Same for the snare. It takes a few minutes, but we get rid of all those ambient noises, ghost notes, and so forth. Because
Right.
with metal music, rock music, it's not about that. If we were talking about a pop track, ghost notes and so forth, you want that in the tracks. That's what helps settle
Part of the
track.
character, right. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Okay.
But for
Right.
rock stuff, Slipknot, today's metal, Shinedown, and so forth, it's all about just boom, bap, boom,
Right.
bap.
Right.
No nuances whatsoever.
Right,
And when
keep
the
it
fills
pretty
come
straight.
in, big fills, and everything else is cut out.